What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my Week 14 Top 25. Now, I've sort of figured out my technology problem. It looks a lot better now, obviously, because my green screen is back and a bunch of other things, but I'm still working through some issues, so if everything is not back to as it normally was, I do sincerely apologize for that. I hopefully will be getting these technology issues figured out pretty darn soon, but for the moment, it looks like we're back to somewhat normal. If my camera's a little bit behind or other things like that, I apologize sincerely, but thank you for tuning in and for supporting the channel in really any way that you guys already do. If you guys would like to, go ahead and feel free to subscribe to the channel. You especially should if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am, because we're going to be posting a lot of college football content here during rivalry week and during championship weekend as well. And if you guys would like to support the channel in literally any other way, I mean, hey, that would be very appreciative. You can like, you can comment, you can share, or if you simply want to kick back, relax, and watch this video, that's helping to support the channel, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. What you can also do to help support me outside of YouTube, go give me a follow on Twitter, Instagram, literally any other social media. At Tailgate829 are my ats, and I would really appreciate you showing support for me over there, and really looking at everything else I do as a sports media student. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive on in here. Week 14, top 25. This should be, or I should say not should be, I sounded like I was previewing a matchup there. This is one of the top 25s where sometimes you have a couple of these for me throughout the season where the past week of college football action just sort of makes you reevaluate the way that you look at teams throughout the nation, and the way that teams are sort of ranked gets reevaluated because there was all the chaos that happened this past week. This week is going to be one of those weeks, right? You had many top 10 teams go down. You had some other upsets and a lot of other chaos that happened. So this is just kind of one of those weeks that's going to make me reevaluate how I rank teams, and it has spit out this top 25 in the model that I have going on in my own head. But I do have to start out with some honorable mentions, and not too many to talk about. Pretty much the same as last week. Syracuse, Kansas State, and Missouri are all really close. Again, Missouri, I just don't feel great being a top 25 team right now. Same thing with Kansas State. But Syracuse, they're able to pull off this win against Miami this upcoming week. You're going to see them in my top 25 right before championship week. And again, the top 25 after champ week probably won't change too much, but I will put out two more top 25s after this one. Again, just really quickly, those are your honorable mentions. So where does that leave us with the rest of the nation? Where does that leave us with the top 25 teams? Well, let's go ahead and start out at number 25, because you do have the Memphis Tigers right down there. They fell one spot, and Army fell 6 spots to number 24. So a couple teams in the American Athletic that are now in that fray. Memphis just ended up dropping 1 spot because there was a team that ended up jumping them. Army, of course, dropping because they got steamrolled by Notre Dame this past week. It was Army's, what a lot of people I think would consider their first true big test. If not their first test, then it was definitely by far their biggest test that Army had faced all season long. And when you go ahead and you take a look at the path for Army still, I mean, they still got a game coming up here this weekend against UTSA. Going to be a tricky one, but a game that Army can win. They're already locked into the American Athletic Conference Championship game. They're going to be playing Tulane. And speaking of Tulane, you'll see them a little bit later in the rankings, but they're going to have to play this Memphis Tigers team that I have sitting down here at number 25. So it's going to be a very interesting week to watch in the American Athletic Conference. Illinois is back in the rankings there at number 23. It was quite the performance against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights this past weekend. I mean, not to say they blew Rutgers out or anything like that, but if you didn't watch the game, you didn't even see the score. It was 38-31, a win for the Fighting Illini, back and forth in the final 2 minutes. It was a crazy end. Illinois elects to kick a field goal. It was like a 58-yarder. The wind was howling. They kicked the field goal, but right before it happened, Rutgers called a timeout. The field goal missed wildly. It was 4th and 13, so Illinois just said, screw it. Let's go for it on 4th and 13. They threw a pass. caught by Pat Bryant, ran it into the end zone for a touchdown, and that is how Illinois ended up winning that game. 2-point conversion was good, and Rutgers couldn't do anything with the football with about 15 seconds left. The Illini have been a great story in the Big Ten this year. Again, not the best story because obviously the Indiana Hoosiers are going to overshadow that, but they still have been a really, really good story. And, well, they are absolutely worthy right now of being in the top 25. They sit there at 8-3. UNLV does climb up one spot there to number 22. UNLV had a win on Friday over the San Jose State Spartans. Gave them a little bit of trouble. San Jose State is a pesky team this year, and trying to defend Nick Nash is one of the hardest things to do in college football this season. But UNLV was able to persevere. Haj Malik Williams continues to do his job. This UNLV rushing attack continues to really pound away. I mean, they had over 60 rushing carries in that game. Just absolutely ridiculous. And, well, when you go ahead and consider everything going on within the Mountain West right now, we'll talk about championship scenarios in the video coming out later on today. But UNLV is a team that's still primed, and I mean, who knows? They definitely could have a role to play to get into the college football playoffs still. But again, we'll talk more about that in a video out later today. Colorado, what happened? And, well, I'll go ahead and answer my own question. Defense couldn't stop a nosebleed, and if you want to be more specific, the defense for the Buffaloes could not stop Devin Neal. Shadur Sanders was still fantastic. Travis Hunter was still doing his thing, but that Colorado defense got no push on the defensive front. They couldn't slow down anything Kansas threw at them. I think Kansas held the football for most of that game there. Anyway, and I'm not just talking about like, oh, they had the ball for 2 or 3 more minutes. No. Kansas dominated time of possession. They had the football for almost, or I should say over, looking at it here, over 20 more minutes than what Colorado possessed the football for. Colorado's third down defense was non-existent. Kansas was 9 of 14, and Kansas outplayed Colorado in pretty much every facet. So Kansas continuing on their upset mayhem. Now, if they can pull off a win in this final week of the season, they're going to be bowl eligible for Colorado. Still not out of the running of a Big 12 Conference championship, but the job has just become a lot harder for the Buffaloes because now they don't control their own destiny. Yes, you still got to win this upcoming Friday against Oklahoma State, but now you need a lot of other things to go your way as well. Let's go ahead and dive on in here into the top 20, where we do see the other team out of the American Athletic Conference that has made the conference championship, and that being the Tulane Green Wave. This is a really, really interesting Green Wave team. And it's a really interesting scenario that they find themselves in because with all the chaos going on within the Big 12 right now, if there are enough things that happen, maybe you see the winner of the American Athletic Championship game get into the college football playoff. Maybe the Big 12 gets left out. Who knows if UNLV or I should say if UNLV makes the conference championship game, they beat Boise State. Even if Colorado State makes it and Boise State goes down, American Athletic Conference champion, are they going to be ranked higher than the Boise State Broncos? Everyone thought, and it still likely is the case, that it's Boise State and the field in the group of 5 realm. But Tulane, Army, Memphis, they're going to have some other things to say about that. And Tulane on bye this past week. Again, the big game with Memphis coming up. If Tulane, I think, wants to stay alive for the college football playoff race, they're going to have to win this game against Memphis. And it's going to be a hard one to win. I think they are, looking at it here, they are the 2-touchdown favorite, which might seem big because I think Memphis is a pretty darn good team. But Tulane, taking a look at it there, ranked 20th. They got themselves, if enough things go right, a pretty good shot to make the college football playoff, and they did jump up quite a few spots. Not quite a few, I lied. They did jump up 1 spot there to number 20. Number 19 is going to be the Iowa State Cyclones. They jump up 3 spots from this past week. Iowa State's in great position to make the Big 12 Conference Championship game. Again, talk more about that in a later video, but basically they win and they're in. They're going to get a resume-boosting win when they beat the Kansas State Wildcats, if they beat the Kansas State Wildcats this weekend, and then obviously a chance to go win the Big 12, and that would probably put Iowa State in the college football playoff. Yes, they've had a couple performances here where they've been very shaky. Again, the 2 back-to-back losses to Texas Tech and then to Kansas haven't really played their best football down the stretch. Now's the time that Iowa State can really turn it on and turn it around. You take a look at this BYU team here as well, and the BYU is also a very, very interesting case because when you talk about this BYU Cougars team, look, man, they started out 9-0. They have now fallen 3 spots from last week after they lost to Arizona State, and I don't punish them too much for that because I did think that Arizona State was going to be able to win that game and that BYU was going to fall here. But now BYU, I mean, it looked like they were shoo-ins to make the Big 12 championship game. Now they not only have to beat Houston this week, they also need a couple things to go their way. That's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to watch. But when you're talking about this BYU Cougars team, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how things play out from here. Again, BYU is going to need some help to try to get in to their conference championship game. A lot of people figured BYU was, again, a team that was pretty much going to be in and make the college football playoff. Now they're going to have to work, and now they're going to need to have some things go their way because of the results over the past couple of weekends. Texas A&M is up here at number 17. They dropped 3 spots. Oh, possibly game of the year on the road against Auburn. What a phenomenal game that was. Truly, what a phenomenal game that was. And I mean, Keandre Lambert-Smith made a play, and the Texas A&M wide receiver, I'm blanking on who it is, and probably a good thing for a lot of Aggies fans. They probably want to forget who dropped that pass on the 2-point conversion. Texas A&M just didn't make a play at the end of the game. And how about this, ladies and gentlemen? It was field goal kicking for Auburn that put them in that position. The thing that has plagued Auburn throughout the entirety of this 2024 season was the thing that saved them in this game against Texas A&M. I know. How ironic is that? But for the Texas A&M Aggies, look, they're still in position to make the SEC championship game. If they beat Texas and then they go beat Georgia in the SEC championship game, they're not going to be left out of the college football playoff. A&M still in a fairly solid position, but I did drop them 3 spots to number 17. South Carolina does have a win over Texas A&M, which helps their case a lot, and then jumping 3 spots to number 16. South Carolina, a team that I really want to put inside of the top 15, but there was one team that I had to put inside the top 15 that's a little more deserving than this point besides South Carolina. But South Carolina, man, you take a look at this team this year, they got some really impressive wins. They've been really, really close in a lot of instances in pulling off some really big-time wins. They have a win over Missouri. That's a Missouri team that somehow the committee is ranking. You got to win on the road against Oklahoma. They just beat Bama. You have a close loss to Bama, a close loss to LSU, a loss at home against Ole Miss, which honestly probably is South Carolina's least favorite performance so far this season. But otherwise, you've taken care of business. You even have that upset win over Texas A&M, and it is crazy to think that now South Carolina, with all the chaos that happened in the SEC this past week, South Carolina, a very important game on the road against Clemson this week. If they are able to win that one, they could potentially get themselves an at-large bid depending on what else happens in the nation in the college football playoffs. South Carolina is not out of this thing at all. They are very well in the mix because now if you're going to pull together all these, instead of 2-loss SEC teams, all these 3-loss SEC teams, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Bama, what happens, right? It's going to be so fascinating to watch. But in terms of a top 25, South Carolina has done themselves a whole lot of favors playing as good a football as they are right now. You move on into the top 15, and there are the Arizona State Sun Devils up 5 spots from last week. They were 20 last week. Now they are 15. And this is the team that I had to put inside of the top 15 because if you were to sort of look at the way the Big 12 is going to shape out, Arizona State's got the most favorable path to the Big 12 championship game. And the Big 12 tiebreakers, I have yet to mention them in this video because they are just so stupidly complicated. Again, something we'll talk about in a video that is going to come out later today. But the Arizona State Sun Devils win a lot of tiebreakers. They are sitting in a really, really good position to go make a Big 12 conference championship game. All they got to do is take care of business against the Arizona Wildcats, and they will be playing for a Big 12 championship. But the way that they were able to play that game against BYU, phenomenal. And I know there was the whole thing with the fans rushing the field. You had to get them off. There's 1 second back. Kenny Dillingham not happy about that at all, by the way. And in a lot of people's minds, understandably so, but the ball did touch out of bounds with 1 second left. Yeah, again, the clock does not stop until the football hits something out of bounds. Well, it didn't hit anything but a fan with literally, if they put tenths of seconds back on the clock, it probably would have been a tenth of a second, if not 2 tenths, 3 tenths, something incredibly low like that. It was a blink of an eye after that football touched the fans' hands that the clock went down to 0. So BYU had one play. They threw the Hail Mary to the 3-yard line. Oh, it got caught, but Arizona State was able to survive. Kenny Dillingham has done a phenomenal job with that program. A lot of people, including myself, I know, shame, picked them to finish last in the Big 12 Conference. Not anymore. They're probably the favorite to go win the conference championship. Arizona State at number 15. What do you do with Alabama and Ole Miss after this past week? Well, I don't really know, to be quite honest with you. What I do think is that they will fall in this sort of range here. Now, do I think Alabama and Ole Miss are out of college football playoff contention? No. I still think that there is a path, and there are some ways where the committee could look and say, this is one of the best 12 teams in the country. We're going to put them in to the college football playoff. But I mean, man, the inconsistency that Alabama and Ole Miss has played with this year has just been unreal. Let's start with the Alabama Crimson Tide because their inconsistency is a little bit easier to understand in some ways, right? I know that you might be saying, Nate, the inconsistency is never easy to understand, and I'd actually agree with all you fine people in that regards. But when you talk about Alabama and you talk about Ole Miss, again, starting with Bama, defense was a problem, and now it just seems like the offense decides whether or not to show up. Jalen Milroe was non-existent. In fact, he played awfully in that game against Oklahoma this past week. And then Jackson Dart at quarterback for Ole Miss. What are you doing? Throwing in the double, triple coverage balls that have no chance to get to your wide receiver. And of course, they're going to end up getting picked. That's what happened to Jackson Dart 2 times in the final 2 minutes in that upset win for the Florida Gators. Ole Miss and Alabama have yet to really find their consistency. Now, when these two teams play really well, and they are at their best, they are one of the best 12 teams in the country, both of them. But their inconsistencies this year, both of them have bad losses. Alabama's got Vandy and Oklahoma, and again, those aren't horrible losses, but comparatively speaking to some of the other teams that are in the SEC, those are not great losses. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky, and now they have this loss to Florida. Again, not a bad loss per se, but definitely a loss that, well, I should say obviously a game that you would have liked to win, but definitely a loss that is going to impact your resume. I just couldn't drop them out of the top 15 because of the other teams below them. I think Alabama and Ole Miss are both better than the Arizona State Sun Devils, and I do believe that they are both better than a bunch of the other teams that you see below them, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Iowa State, BYU. So this is just sort of the range that they fell in here for me. Let's go ahead and take a look now above them, though, at the top 12, because there is some shuffling. Ladies and gentlemen, Clemson is not dead. Now, I know that they are going to have to rely on a Miami loss to get into the ACC championship game. Again, something we'll talk about later in another video. I'm going to keep saying that because I'm going to keep pushing it because I want you to watch it. But Clemson could very well get an at-large bid. Huge game this week against the South Carolina Gamecocks. If they win that, that's going to add to their resume, and you take a look at the resume that Clemson has already put together. I mean, yeah, they have that loss at Georgia, but again, Georgia's already locked in to the ACC or the SEC, my apologies, championship game. Clemson has dominated most other opponents this year with the exception of that game against the Louisville Cardinals. But outside of that, they're going to have no ranked wins. They have some good road wins. Virginia Tech and Pitt are bad. They went on the road and beat Florida State and Wake Forest. Those two teams are bad. They dominated opponents they're supposed to dominate. But again, this gives Clemson an opportunity for a ranked win to add to their resume. Getting in the ACC championship game would help their resume a lot more, which means Miami is going to have to lose. But Clemson, they've also seen some inconsistency down the stretch here. We'll see if they show back up in the Cade Klubnik and Garrett Riley combination on offense that was putting up 50, 60 points throughout the early part of the season, shows back up. Guys, Clemson is not dead. They are still very well in this conversation, and it would do them a lot of favors if they won. In fact, even if they dominated South Carolina this weekend. Boise State is up to number 11. They're the front runners for the group of 5. I think right now Ashton Jeanty is the front runner for the Heisman Trophy. He's over 2,000 yards. What more can you say about the guy? He's just been absolutely phenomenal so far this season. And when you take a look at the Boise State Broncos, long as they take care of business, they're going to be in and right now in position to get a first round bye, which I thoroughly agree with there as well. When you dive on into the top, again, not too much to talk about Boise State. They did struggle this week, though, against Wyoming. That is of note. Wyoming, not a very good football team. They did struggle, so we'll see how Boise State can respond. Let's dive on into the top 10 here. Indiana does hang into the top 10 because you take a look at that game in Columbus. There are a couple different viewpoints that you could look at that. If you're going to look at it from an Indiana fan, which I'm going to do so now, we'll look at it from an Ohio State perspective later. You look at it from an Indiana perspective and say, man, that game should have been a whole lot closer. Should have been a 16-point win. Ohio State scores that late touchdown that didn't really matter to make it look a little more lopsided on the scoreboard, and it probably could have even been a single possession game, a single-digit game, if the special teams errors weren't there. Well, what happened? The special teams errors were there, and Indiana got absolutely housed by that Buckeye defense. 5 sacks, only 151 yards of total offense allowed, and Curtis Rourke just didn't look great. These wide receivers didn't look great. The run game, it was able to find its rhythm now and again, especially ripping off a couple big runs there, I believe in the late stages of that third quarter, if not early stages of that fourth. But Indiana, to me, is still a top 10 team, and with all the chaos that happened around the college football world, Indiana's still a team that I think should be in a spot to be in the college football playoff. We'll see what the committee thinks on Tuesday, but if you want my opinion, I do think Indiana's good enough to get into the college football playoff. They've shown it throughout the year. Yeah, their first true, if some people are going to say their only tried and true test this year, they failed, but I mean, they've done enough this year. They've blown everybody else out, and that, to me, I think warrants a spot in the college football playoff. But that's my 2 cents. We'll see what the committee thinks on Tuesday. Miami and SMU are here. And again, in the sort of reevaluating how I rank teams, I did have SMU over Miami. Now I have Miami over SMU because when I look at these two teams, I see two very, very good teams. SMU's already in the ACC championship game. What a story it's been for Rhett Lashley and the Mustangs this season to be able to get in to the ACC championship game. Great work done by him in their first season in a Power 4 conference. Miami, they're going to have to win a game against Syracuse. That is not going to be easy to win, especially with all the defensive struggles that Miami has got. You got to defend some pretty darn good running backs. And, the second leading passer in the nation in Kyle McCord, the Ohio State transfer, who's been slinging it all over the field for the Syracuse Orange this season. That is what Miami's going to have to defend, but Cam Ward continues to put this team on his back, and that, to me, separates Miami from SMU a little bit. And obviously, if those two teams were to play on a neutral field, which could happen in the ACC championship game, I do think Miami would be favored, and that is what you're going to see if those two teams match up in the SEC championship, or in the ACC championship. But moving on to the SEC now, Tennessee, they were on the outside looking in of the college football playoff, according to the college football playoff committee, and everything that needed to happen in the SEC and then some happened. And so Tennessee right now is firmly back into the field. As long as they take care of business against Vandy, they're going to be in the college football playoff as an at-large team. Now, again, where the SEC conversation becomes really interesting is if Tennessee loses to Vandy, then you have to group them in with Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, possibly a 3-loss SEC runner-up in the Georgia Bulldogs if they were to lose the SEC championship game, maybe even if they win it and then they get beat by Georgia Tech this week. Georgia, again, is just one of the teams that's going to continue to rise because of everyone else's demise. So Georgia is up here, up to number 6. Hey, when that Bulldog team plays well, they are a team that can go win a national championship. And we saw that take place when they played the Tennessee Volunteers. Obviously, why Georgia is above Tennessee because of the head-to-head result on the football field. When you talk about those two teams, though, again, they're just sort of kicking back, and looking at all the SEC chaos right now. And Tennessee's going to take it. Georgia is going to take it because now Georgia, I mean, they probably didn't have to worry anyway because they got that win over Tennessee to put them back into the college football playoff field. But now Georgia cemented themselves in the SEC championship game because of all the tiebreakers and stuff they won. Again, talk about it in a video later today. But those two teams did jump up very close to the top 5. But guys, my top 5 from last week did not change. I was early in AP poll standards. The AP poll just jumped Notre Dame into the top 5. I did it last week because I really do believe that Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman's football team are that good. Everyone is going to dog on them for the NIU loss, and understandably so. That is going to be the worst loss by far, unless, again, some catastrophe and upsets happen. It will be the worst loss by far that any team in the college football playoff field or trying to compete for a college football playoff spot will have. Period. End of story. And there's no denying that. I am not denying that What I also can see is the way that Notre Dame has dominated teams ever since that game and dominated some pretty good teams. Army, not a bad team. Louisville, not a bad team. Georgia Tech, not a bad team. And again, on the road at USC, going to be a tough one for them. But if they get that one done, I mean, USC's been pretty subpar this year. Let's be honest with ourselves. As long as Notre Dame wins this game against USC this weekend, there is no reason not to think that the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are going to be in the college football playoff. There just simply is no way that they can be left out. Period. End of story. No way that Notre Dame is going to be left out if they go ahead and take care of business against USC this week. They will be in, and I expect the committee to have pretty much this same top 5 there as well. Penn State's at number 4. I mean, now, the one place I can make an argument in this top 5 is for Notre Dame, yes, going to number 4 because of the way that Penn State has looked over the past couple of weeks. Yes, they dominated Purdue, but they didn't look their best, and it almost cost them not looking their best in a game against the Minnesota Golden Gophers this weekend. That run game, it's got to get its thing figured out. Singleton and Allen are not running that well. Tyler Warren is still being an absolute dog, and he's being great. He's being a great offensive weapon, and Drew Aller being able to find him has really helped save this Penn State team a time or two. But they got to be able to get some things figured out. Defense didn't even play that well against Minnesota either. We'll see what happens with Penn State. Texas sits here at 3. Little trouble with Kentucky, but they're able to get past. No punishment there. Ohio State gets their second top 10 or even top 5 win of the season. Obviously, it would be a top 10 win if Indiana doesn't fall out of the top 10. But at the time, their second top 5 win. They're going to stay here at number 2. Let's look at that Indiana game through a Buckeye perspective. I think a lot of Buckeye fans think that the game could have been a little bit more of a blowout. Yes, if the special teams gaffes didn't happen, it could have been closer, but Ohio State missed out on a couple of red zone opportunities early in that game, and there's no reason that Ohio State fans are thinking, there's no reason we couldn't have been up 21-7, 28-7 before the half and have put that game away by halftime, and maybe you could have scored 40, maybe you could have scored 50 on the Indiana Hoosiers. Again, hindsight 2020, coulda, woulda, shoulda. Ohio State still dominated. They won that game. That defense was awesome. The criticism with Ohio State was they weren't able to get that pass rush fully engaged. They got it engaged against Indiana this past week. And then obviously Oregon on a bye week. Don't have much more to say about them. They are sitting there as the number 1 team in the country. As long as they take care of business against Washington, then, well, they're going to stay that way. But they're already locked into a Big Ten championship game spot. If Ohio State takes care of business in the game this weekend, it will be a rematch of what was a phenomenal game in Eugene and what assuredly will be a phenomenal game in Indianapolis as well. But, guys, that is going to do it for my Week 14 Top 25. If you like this video, let me know in the comment section down below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and I'll see all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.